Champagne and celebrations as England won the Rugby World Cup in 2003. Steve Thompson was on the pitch, but he has no memory of it.
I'm looking at this, I get nothing.
Do you feel any connection to the person there at all?
No. I just cannot ever remember being there, having a coffee, being in Australia.
12 years after that World Cup win, Steve Thompson started noticing mood swings, memory loss. At 42, he was diagnosed with early onset dementia and probable chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a disease which has been connected to repeated head injuries, just like those he experienced during his rugby career.
We were getting knocked out in training all the time. In those days, it was just so physical, rucks, mauls, scrums with a big hit. So when they look at it, there's subconcussions. They've sort of tried to work out that 80,000 to 100,000 subconcussions that we've probably gone through in our career.
When you did have a knock that had an impact on you, that you knew that you were feeling differently afterwards, what was the attitude to it then?
As long as it's your head, it's all right, because if you pull your hamstring, you can't play. If it's your head, there's some pills.
Was there any discussion of there being a risk of long-term, neurodegenerative problems?
Nothing at all. We knew we were going to get bad knees, elbows, necks, things like that, but there was nothing of the head at all. It was just the only thing you'd lose in your head was your looks, and most of us didn't have any of them. If anything, they said use your head. That was your weapon to use, like it was invincible.
CTE can only be confirmed after death. One brain bank found evidence of the disease in more than half of the professional athletes who donated their organs to research. But many sporting protocols are based on the work of the Concussion In Sport Group, funded by the likes of the International Olympic Committee, FIFA and World Rugby. And their most recent statement found a cause and effect relationship between contact sport and CTE had not yet been demonstrated.
The Concussion In Sport Group has been immensely influential, along with Paul McCrory. Since the early 2000s, they have published every 4 years a consensus statement. And that consensus statement has been what controlled the narrative on sports-related head injuries. So therefore, they controlled litigation in America. They controlled the views of the governing bodies in the United Kingdom. They literally controlled the story that was told and the beliefs that were held.
Dr Paul McCrory was the group's chair and lead author of 4 of these consensus statements on concussion in sport. He's also a former editor-in-chief of the British Journal of Sports Medicine. But that same journal recently retracted 9 of Dr McCrory's articles and placed an expression of concern on 74 more. One issue was plagiarism.
And my initial reaction was sadness, and to have somebody with such terrible ethics in charge of such an important issue that affects not only professional athletes, but children worldwide. And we're talking about sports like football and rugby. We're talking about nearly 300 million people who play these sports, who have been, in my opinion, harmed, by the bad work of Paul McCrory.
In one retracted article, Paul McCrory misquoted an early recommendation designed to protect players who'd experienced concussion, weakening it in the process. And then he used that inaccurate quote to argue against set temporary exclusions for players after a head injury, calling it arbitrary. In a statement, the British Medical Journal said trust in McCrory's work, specifically articles he published as a single author, is broken.
Other people who have taken literally those documents, taken literally the work that McCrory has done, and that has influenced their research. So it actually turns on its head the concussion in sport research, turns on its head the consensus statements of almost the last 20 years, and causes us to have to step back and rethink everything in the light of changing evidence and in the light of finding credible evidence.
Now, in the case of the Concussion in Sport Group's influential statements, we should be clear. Paul McCrory did not produce those alone. And the group, which McCrory resigned from in March, highlight that no concerns have been raised about work that McCrory published as a co-author. But those who'd argue that these retractions give us a window into Paul McCrory's ethics still have concerns about the influence he had the potential to wield, an influence they think still leaves questions to be answered.
Paul McCrory is representative of the larger problem we're having globally with CTE and dementia and sport. They're trying to keep the profit machine going without interruption, both make fans want to watch, make their people want to let their kids still play these sports.
We tried to contact Dr McCrory about this story, but received no response. When plagiarism concerns were first raised earlier this year, his only public comments were to say that any errors were not deliberate or intentional. For those feeling the effects of decades of concussion policies, on the other hand, there has been palpable anger.
He's just a disgusting human being. There's no other word for it. You know, surely he's got blood on his hands. There has been people died. There's been people committed suicide. There's so much because of his work, or his lack of work, his lack of integrity, honesty. When we played rugby, we done our job, and then there was people like McCrory around that were supposed to be doing the job to say what was the best way of keeping us safe, and it wasn't.
Tomorrow, the Concussion in Sport Group will meet for the first time in 6 years and start to produce a new statement, one without Paul McCrory's involvement. Trust, once broken, proves hard to repair, as true for scientific research as players' faith they're being protected. The future of many sports may depend on efforts to rebuild that trust.